Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Hello, my name is Dylan Hart, 23 years old. I'm a first-year student at the University of Colorado Law School, living in Boulder, a small city nestled at the foot of the majestic Rocky Mountains. Boulder has a beauty that is both poetic and rugged, with tree-lined streets shaded by green pines, snow-capped mountains in winter, and air so fresh it feels like you're breathing in the entire world. But for me, this place is more than just its natural scenery. It's where I'm trying to find myself, trying to prove that I'm not the invisible person my family has always treated me as. I grew up in Castle Rock, a town a few hours' drive south of Boulder. Castle Rock is smaller, quieter, with red brick houses scattered along gently sloping streets, ancient oak trees, and an atmosphere where you can smell hay and freshly baked bread from the local bakery every morning. But for me, Castle Rock was never a warm place. It was where I always felt forgotten, like a long, silent shadow passing through my own home. My family, how should I put it, is a picture that looks beautiful from the outside, but is full of cracks within. My father, Russell Hart, is a small-scale real estate investor. He's tall and lean, with a sharp face and eyes that always seem to be calculating the value of everything. One night, we were sitting at dinner, my fork barely tapping the edge of my plate, when he said it, just like that. Old people should know their place and not be a burden to their children. His voice was flat, like he was reading off a spreadsheet. I remember my stomach tightening. My fork paused midair. I didn't say anything, I never did, but I wanted to scream. He was talking about Grandma. My grandmother, who basically raised me when they were too busy chasing careers and appearances. I just bowed my head, swallowed the anger, and said nothing. That's what I always did. My mother, Claudia Hart, is the opposite, but not in a better way. She's an administrative manager at a cosmetic surgery center in downtown Denver. She always appears with perfectly curled blonde hair, glossy red manicured nails, and a smile I'm certain she's practiced in front of the mirror hundreds of times. Mom is a perfectionist, wanting everything to be beautiful and flawless. From the way the dinner table is set to how her children must perform in the eyes of the neighbors. The forks have to be lined up just so. The napkins must match the table runner. Even the fruit in the bowl has to look photo-ready. But that perfectionism comes with comparison. And in those comparisons, I'm always the loser. Look at Kevin and learn from him. He knows how to make things happen, she says often, her voice brimming with pride. Not pride for me. Never for me. Kevin, my eldest brother, is 29 and the pride of the family. He earned an MBA from Arizona State University and now runs a tech startup in Austin, Texas. In my parents' eyes, Kevin is the embodiment of success. A luxurious apartment, international business trips, and online articles calling him a promising young entrepreneur. His LinkedIn profile looks like it belongs to someone who has it all figured out. But I know the truth. Behind all the glitz, Kevin is struggling. His company is barely staying afloat. I heard from a mutual friend that he took on a massive loan just to keep things running, something he's never told our parents. Not that it would matter. To them, Kevin is still the golden standard. The one they hold up as the example every chance they get. Dylan, why can't you be a bit more like your brother? Mom asked once, her voice soft, but her eyes sharp with disappointment. I remember staring down at my coffee mug, swirling what was left inside it, giving her a faint smile. I didn't answer, because I knew, no matter what I said, she wouldn't listen. She never does. Then there's my younger sister, Abigail. She's 19, a freshman at a small college in Denver. Abigail is, well, Abigail. The kind of person who always knows how to make people like her. She's lively, outgoing, always smiling. She has this way of making everyone in the room feel like they matter, even if it's only for a moment. She's got a ton of friends on social media. Her Instagram is packed with glossy snapshots of family vacations, birthday dinners, carefully filtered selfies. The happy family images rack up hundreds of likes. But if you look closely, there's something missing. Me. I'm rarely in those photos. Once, I asked her, half joking, half wondering, why don't you ever tag me in the family pictures? She laughed. A light, breezy laugh that landed sharper than she knew. Oh, Dylan, you're busy with law school. Who would dare bother you? And that was it. No follow-up. Just another smile for the camera. I knew that wasn't the real reason. She just didn't think I belonged in her version of the family. Not really. To Abigail, I'm just a faint blur in the background of her perfect life. In that picture-perfect family, the only person who ever truly saw me, really saw me, was my grandmother, Lillian Hart. She lives alone in an old house on the outskirts of Fort Collins, about an hour and a half drive from my school. Her house is a special place. It feels like a separate world, set apart from the rest of my life. It's small and weathered, with chipped wooden window frames and a little garden full of wildflowers that she still tends to, even at nearly 80 years old. Grandma is a petite woman with snow-white hair and warm brown eyes that always shine with kindness. There's something steady about her, like a candle that doesn't flicker no matter how hard the wind blows. After my grandfather passed away 4 years ago, she's lived alone, but never once complained. She always told me, "Dylan, as long as you live true to your heart, that's enough." Those words mean more to me than any praise I could ever get from my parents. They're simple, but they feel like the only truth I've ever been given freely. I still remember those summer afternoons in Castle Rock when I was a kid. My parents were always busy with work, and Kevin was too absorbed in his own spotlight, always off bragging about his latest school award or science competition. Meanwhile, I'd slip away to Grandma's house, the one place that felt like mine. She'd sit in her armchair, a crocheted blanket across her knees, and tell me stories about Grandpa. Her voice was always soft but firm, like she was weaving the past into something I could carry. "Your grandfather was a dedicated lawyer," she would say, eyes twinkling with memory. "But he always said law isn't just about winning cases. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves." I'd sit cross-legged on the floor beside her, completely still, listening. In those moments, I felt seen. I felt understood. And I felt like maybe, just maybe, I had a place in this world. But things started to change after Grandpa passed. Slowly, at first, just little slips. Grandma would trail off in the middle of a story or forget where she put her reading glasses. Then it became more noticeable. Some days, she calls me Justin, my grandfather's name. Other days, she asks if I've seen my mother even though Mom hasn't visited her in months. She forgets what day it is or why she walked into the kitchen. Still, physically, she's fine. She can cook for herself and she still tends to that little garden of hers, full of wildflowers and overgrown herbs. But sometimes I catch her standing in the middle of it, just staring at the blooms with a lost look on her face. When I try to bring it up with my parents, they dismiss it outright. "She's old. Being forgetful is normal," Dad says flatly, like he's commenting on the weather. Mom doesn't even look up from her tablet. "Why are you worrying about her? She has her own house, her pension. She can take care of herself." I just sit there, stunned. How can they talk about Grandma, their mother, the woman who raised them and loved them, with such cold detachment? Like she's some old, useless object collecting dust on a shelf? The feeling of being forgotten isn't new to me. It doesn't just come from them. It runs through my whole family like a silent thread. You'd think I'd be used to it by now, but it still stings. One Christmas, I came home with small gifts for everyone. Nothing extravagant, just things I'd picked out with care. A law book I thought Kevin would appreciate. A scarf I spent weeks knitting for Mom in CU Boulder colors. A landscape painting I made of Dad's favorite fishing spot. We sat around the dinner table. They talked and laughed, mostly about Kevin's upcoming Europe trip. Dad asked Abigail about her summer plans. Mom poured wine and commented on how the roast turned out. But no one mentioned my gifts. Not one word. I ate in silence, chewing through cold cuts and potato salad like an uninvited guest at someone else's celebration. After dinner, I got up to clear the table. As I passed behind Abigail, she muttered without looking up from her phone, "Thanks, Dylan." It didn't sound like gratitude. It sounded like punctuation, something you say because it's required, not because you mean it. I'm not the type to hold grudges. I've learned to accept that I'm not the center of this family. Maybe I never was. But deep down, I've always hoped that one day they'd see me. Truly see me. The way Grandma does. She's the only one who never forgets my birthday, who always asks about my dreams and fears. Every time I visit, Grandma makes tea, always chamomile, with a slice of lemon just the way I like it, and we sit at her little kitchen table. She listens as I talk about law school, the stress of midterms, the professors who grade like they've forgotten what it's like to be a student, or how I sometimes just sit by the lake in Boulder and watch the sunset, letting the stillness soak into my bones. She never interrupts, never judges, never tells me to be more like Kevin or asks why I'm not doing what someone else is doing. To her, I'm Dylan. Just Dylan. Her grandson. The one she loves. But even with all that, I can't deny there's a growing distance between us. Not because I want there to be God, no, but because of time and life and geography. Fort Collins isn't far from Boulder. About an hour and a half if traffic behaves. But for a first-year law student like me, it might as well be another state. My weeks are a blur of coursework, casebooks, study groups, and nights that stretch into mornings. Every time I call her, I promise myself, this weekend, I'll visit. But then the weekend rolls around, and there's another deadline, or someone in the cohort suggests a group study session, or I'm just too damn tired to get out of bed before noon. I tell myself she's okay. She's always okay. She still takes care of herself. still answers the phone with a cheerful, "Hello, sweetheart." But deep down, I know I'm making excuses. Then everything changed. It was a Friday afternoon, just as I was leaving the campus library. My phone buzzed. A text. "Dylan, are you free this weekend? I made a birthday cake and want you to try it." That's all it said. Simple. Unassuming. But when I read it, something in me tightened. Her birthday. Her 79th. And I'd almost forgotten. I opened my calendar, half expecting to see a pile of deadlines, but there was nothing urgent. No exams. No study sessions I couldn't skip. I sat down on a bench outside the law building, the chill of the stones seeping through my jeans. I typed back, "I'll be there, Grandma. Wait for me." I didn't know then what that visit would mean. I thought I was just going for cake. Just to sit and talk and make up for a few missed weekends. I didn't know it would be the beginning of a storm. That it would unravel truths I'd never seen coming. Force me to confront my family, not just their expectations, but who they really were beneath the polished smiles and the practiced words. The drive from Boulder to Fort Collins that day felt longer than usual. It wasn't the distance. Google Maps still said an hour and a half, but the weight in my chest. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows over the plains as I merged onto Interstate 25. Fields stretched out on either side, gold and dry from weeks without rain. Patches of deep green pine forests broke up the landscape, like old memories refusing to fade. I turned on the radio, skipped through 3 stations before turning it off again. No song could quiet the thoughts racing through my mind. Is she really okay? Have I been fooling myself? Why does this trip feel different? I kept driving, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the small gift on the passenger seat. A wooden photo frame I'd made in my spare time at the apartment. Inside it was a picture I'd taken last summer, Grandma in her garden, holding a green watering can, smiling up at me under the bright sun. Her white hair glowing, her face soft and alive in a way I hadn't seen much since Grandpa passed away. I hoped the frame would bring her joy, a little reminder that no matter how busy life got, I was always here. I hadn't said it enough lately, but I meant it. As I turned onto the familiar road leading to her house on the outskirts of Fort Collins, my chest began to tighten. There it was, Grandma's home, small and weathered, with the same faded gray-tiled roof and chipped wooden window frames that always made it look a little worn but never unloved. The front garden was still alive with golden daisies, lavender, and a few wild roses, her favorites. But something felt off. The house looked too still. No smoke from the chimney. No soft amber glow from the living room window welcoming me in like always. A voice in my head tried to reassure me. She's probably just resting. Or maybe she's in the kitchen with the cake she mentioned. I parked the car, grabbed my bag, and walked up the creaky porch steps. The familiar ache of guilt mixed with anticipation twisted in my stomach. I pushed open the wooden door, it groaned the way it always had. "Grandma, I'm here," I called out, deliberately cheerful, hoping I'd catch her by surprise. Maybe she's napping, maybe she'll come around the corner smiling with her apron on. But nothing. No reply. I stepped inside. The house smelled like it always did. Old wood, a hint of herbal tea, something faintly floral that clung to the curtains. The living room looked untouched. Her floral upholstered armchair stood beside the fireplace. A small wooden table still held that same vase of dried flowers. The wedding photo of Grandma and Grandpa hung above it all, his hand gently resting on hers in the black and white image, both of them smiling like they shared some secret the rest of us would never understand. But the silence was different this time. Too deep. Too still. No footsteps in the hallway. No soft humming drifting from the kitchen. "Grandma." I called again, quieter now. Worry creeping in. I walked slowly down the short hallway toward the kitchen, every step heavier than the last. Then I saw her. She was sitting alone at the dining table. A small birthday cake sat in front of her, covered in white frosting, topped with a few strawberries. The kind she used to make when I was a kid. She wore the light blue sweater I gave her last year, the one she said brought out the color in her eyes. Her silver hair was tied back neatly, the way she always did when she was expecting company. But her face, her expression was distant, hollow, like she wasn't really there, like she was somewhere far beyond the walls of that kitchen. "Grandma," I said softly, stepping closer, forcing a smile to hold back the rising fear in my chest. She looked up slowly, her brown eyes finding me. They brightened, just for a moment. "Dylan," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, but filled with the kind of warmth that wrapped around me like a blanket. "You're here. I made this cake, but..." Her voice trailed off as she looked down at the cake. Then back at me. Her eyes searched mine, flickering with something, confusion. "Why did I make it?" she asked quietly. "Is it someone's birthday?" It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Her birthday. Her 79th. And she had forgotten. I swallowed hard, keeping my voice steady as I sat down beside her. "Yeah, Grandma. It's a special day, I said gently. I reached over and placed my hand on hers. Her hand was cold, fragile, her thin fingers trembling slightly. I held it gently, afraid even the smallest squeeze might hurt her. "It's your birthday, Grandma," I said as gently as I could. "I came to eat cake with you." She looked up at me and offered a smile, faint, wavering, like a flickering light trying to stay alive in the wind. "Oh, my birthday," she repeated softly, eyes drifting toward the cake on the table. "So I must have made this for myself." Then, she looked around, scanning the room with a puzzled expression. "But why are you the only one here? Where are your parents? Your siblings?" Her words sank deep. I looked around the kitchen, my eyes landing on the empty chairs, the two mismatched plates, the two old forks laid out neatly on the table. There were no balloons, no gift bags, no flowers, no card, just her homemade cake, and me. "They must be busy, Grandma," I lied, forcing a smile, though my voice was tight. I felt my throat ache from the effort to stay calm. "But I'm here now. Let's eat the cake, okay?" I stood up, found a knife, and cut a slice for her. The cake was slightly uneven, probably made from memory, with no recipe. I placed the slice on her plate. She nodded slowly, her eyes still distant, like she was watching something only she could see. Maybe a memory. We ate in silence. Only the ticking of the old wall clock filled the space. The cake was sweet, soft, made with love, but every bite I swallowed was heavy. Not because of the taste, because of what it meant, because of who wasn't here. After we finished, I gathered the plates and began clearing the table, pretending everything was normal. "Dylan," she said suddenly, her voice fragile. "Have you seen your grandfather?" My hand froze mid-motion. "He said he'd be home for my birthday." I turned toward her. She was looking at me expectantly, her eyes blinking slowly as if trying to hold back confusion. Grandpa had been gone 4 years now. Cancer. I took a breath and walked back to her side, kneeling slightly to meet her gaze. I smiled, though my lips trembled. "Grandpa's at the market, Grandma," I said gently. "Don't worry. He'll be back soon." She nodded slowly, and I saw the doubt in her eyes, but she didn't argue. She just looked toward the window as if waiting to see his truck pull up. I stepped outside onto the porch and closed the door behind me. The air was colder than before, but I barely felt it. My hands were shaking. I pulled out my phone, thumbed through the contacts, and hit Dad. It rang a few times before he answered. "Dylan, what's up?" His voice was curt, cold, like I was an interruption, not a son. "Today is Grandma's birthday," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "Why isn't anyone here? Where is everybody?" There was a long pause. Then he said, "Oh, we're all skiing in Aspen. Kevin wanted the whole family to go, so your mom and Abigail came along. The weather's nice this weekend, you know." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Skiing," I said, the word dry in my mouth. "You knew it was Grandma's birthday, didn't you? Why didn't anyone tell me about the trip? Why isn't anyone here with her?" "Dylan, calm down," he replied, sharper now. "It's just a birthday. They happen every year. Besides, Grandma has you there, right? Your mom sent her some money last week. She's not lacking anything." I didn't answer. I just hung up. I turned back and looked through the screen door. Grandma was still sitting there, her small hands fidgeting with the edge of the tablecloth, eyes distant, waiting for someone who would never return. The anger inside me didn't just simmer, it flared like a wildfire. My family, the people I once thought I belonged to, hadn't just abandoned me, they'd abandoned her. The woman who had spent her life loving and caring for them was now treated like something disposable, not worth their time. I looked at her, sitting there in that chair, her birthday cake barely touched, and I felt this deep, aching anger well up inside me. I sat back down beside her, fighting back tears. "Grandma, can I stay with you for a few days?" I asked softly, my voice cracking at the edges. She turned her head slowly and looked at me. Her eyes searched my face like she was trying to place me again, and then she smiled. A small, lifeless smile. Not like the warm ones I remembered. Not the ones that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "You're such a good boy, Dylan," she whispered. "You're just like your grandfather." That night, I lay on the old bed in the living room, the one with the faded quilt she made years ago. The mattress sagged in the middle, and every time I shifted, the springs groaned beneath me. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind whistling through the gaps in the windows. The house was cold, but not as cold as my heart felt. I kept thinking about my parents, Kevin and Abigail, the picture-perfect siblings. I thought about the family photos lining the hallway at my parents' house, how none of them included me in the last few years. I thought about how easily they had forgotten Grandma, the woman who used to be the heart of every holiday, the one who made everyone feel safe and loved. What made them this way? Was it selfishness? Denial? Or something uglier, something I didn't yet understand? And more importantly, what could I do? How could I protect her? How could I hold on to the love I once believed in? I didn't have answers. Not that night. I didn't know that just a few days later, things would get even worse. The storm I sensed today was only the beginning. The truth I was about to uncover would make me see my family in an entirely new light and force me to stand up. Not just for Grandma, but for myself. The days following Grandma's birthday, I decided to take time off from school. I emailed my professor, telling him I needed to deal with family matters. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. I just couldn't go back to Boulder. Not yet. Not with the image of Grandma sitting silently beside her birthday cake burned into my memory. I needed to be here. I needed to make sure she wasn't alone. Her house, despite its age and creaks, remained a kind of sanctuary. It smelled like dried herbs and honey soap. It held stories in every drawer and memory in every photo frame. And it was the only place I still felt like I belonged. Each morning, I woke up early and made her tea. Chamomile, just how she liked it. Then we'd step outside into the little backyard, where the lavender bushes still grew stubbornly despite the July heat. Grandma liked sitting in the old wooden chair with a cracked armrest, watching me pull weeds or water the plants. "You're good at gardening, Dylan," she said one morning, her voice frail but laced with pride. I smiled. "Learned it from you," I said, even though we both knew she might not remember teaching me. She just nodded, her eyes following a butterfly as it drifted past. I did all of this not just to help her, but to hold on to something, to preserve the little moments. The ones that still felt like they came from a world where love was simple, where my family hadn't splintered, where Grandpa still sat on the porch and called me champ. In the afternoons, as soft golden sunlight filtered through the windows, Grandma and I sat in the living room revisiting old stories. She talked about Grandpa, about their youth when he was a passionate young lawyer in Fort Collins. "Your grandfather used to say that the law is about protecting justice, but justice isn't always found in books," she recounted, her eyes lighting up as if reliving those days. I leaned forward in the old rocking chair, elbows on my knees, just listening. Her voice carried a warmth I hadn't heard in a long time, and for a moment, it felt like the clock had turned back, like we were just two people talking in a simpler time. "What was he like in court?" I asked, trying to coax more out of her. "Oh, fierce when he had to be," she said, her laugh faint but genuine, but always respectful. "He once told a judge that a courtroom wasn't a place to win, it was a place to do right. That judge ended up giving him the toughest cases after that." I smiled. "Sounds like the kind of lawyer I want to be." She reached out, patting my hand gently, but then her brow furrowed. Her eyes studied me, uncertain. "What's your name again?" I felt my heart sink, the moment slipping away like sand through fingers. But I didn't let my face show it. I gave her hand a squeeze and smiled. "I'm Dylan," I said softly. "Your grandson. The one who'll always be here to protect you." She nodded slowly, but I could still see the fog in her eyes. The recognition didn't come, and I had to accept that maybe it wouldn't. Her memory was slipping away piece by piece, like puzzle fragments carried off by the wind. I tried to keep things normal. I cleaned the house, fixed a leaky kitchen faucet, and swept dried leaves off the porch. But the quiet in the house felt different now. Heavier, like it was holding its breath. Every time I looked around, I couldn't shake a sense of unease. Something was wrong. It wasn't just a feeling. I started noticing things. Papers left out on Grandma's desk. A brown envelope in a drawer I'd never seen open before. I didn't want to pry, not into her things. But I also couldn't ignore it. One morning, while she was napping on the couch, I quietly opened the envelope. Inside were bank documents, some old bills, and a handwritten note. The handwriting wasn't hers. It was sharp and rigid, almost surgical. I recognized it. My father's. The note was short. "Meet the buyer. Tuesday, 10 a.m. I stared at it for a long time. Buyer? Buying what? I set the note down on the desk and backed away like I'd touched something hot. I told myself it was probably one of Dad's Fort Collins deals. Maybe he used Grandma's place to jot down notes when visiting. But a voice in my head wouldn't let it go. Something's not right. On my last day before heading back to Boulder, I decided to do a more thorough cleaning, to make sure Grandma would be comfortable while I was gone. I was dusting the old bookshelf in the living room when a knock echoed through the house. Firm, deliberate, not the casual tap of a neighbor dropping by. I walked to the door and opened it. A middle-aged couple stood outside, neatly dressed. The man wore a gray suit and carried a leather briefcase, while the woman beside him, in a beige sweater, gave me a polite smile. "Hello," the man said calmly. "I'm Bob, and this is Susan Miller. We're here to take possession of the house." For a second, I couldn't even process it. The words didn't make sense. "Take possession of the house." I repeated, my voice faltering. "This house isn't for sale. You must be mistaken." The man frowned, glancing at the woman beside him. then pulled a stack of papers from his briefcase. "No, we're not mistaken," he said, his voice steady and confident as he handed me a thick document. "We signed a contract to buy this house from Mr. Russell Hart and Mrs. Lillian Hart. This is the deed of transfer signed by Mrs. Lillian." I blinked at the papers in his hand, a strange tightness building in my chest. I took them slowly, the paper rough between my fingers. My eyes darted across the dense print, legal terms and notary stamps blurring together, until I saw it. At the bottom of the page, just above the date, was a signature I would have known anywhere. Grandma's. It was shaky, slightly slanted, exactly like the one she'd scrawled on my birthday card since I was a kid. A little wobbly, but unmistakably hers. I looked up, the noise of the street suddenly dull and far away. "But why?" I whispered, more to myself than to them. Why would she sign this? This house, her house, was everything. It wasn't just four walls and a roof. It was where she'd lived with Grandpa for over 50 years. It was where I'd come every summer as a kid, where the walls smelled like cinnamon and pine cleaner, where she kept Grandpa's old boots by the back door even after he passed, where the kitchen window caught the morning sun just right. She wouldn't sell it. She couldn't have. "My grandmother didn't sell this house," I said, louder now, firmer. "There's got to be a mistake." The woman, Susan, stepped forward, her expression softening. "We're very sorry if something's unclear," she said, her voice trying for gentle but landing somewhere closer to placating. "But we worked directly with Mr. Russell. He told us Mrs. Lillian agreed to the sale, and she signed in our presence." "In your presence?" I repeated, narrowing my eyes. "Yes, we were here." "She was sitting in that armchair right inside the door," Bob added, pointing toward the living room. "We handed her the pen ourselves." Mr. Russell explained everything. I felt the blood drain from my face. My father. Of course. It had to be him. He'd brought them here. He'd handed her the pen. He'd orchestrated this whole thing while I was in Boulder, buried in casebooks and cold calls, thinking Grandma was safe, that her world was untouched. I glanced back through the doorway. She was still napping, oblivious, the Afghan blanket pulled up to her chest, one hand curled near her cheek like a child. She didn't know. She had no idea what was happening. I turned back to them, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Please wait here," I said, forcing my voice not to shake. They nodded, and I stepped back inside, closing the door behind me. I walked quickly to her room, kneeling beside the bed. "Grandma," I said gently, touching her shoulder. "Can you wake up? I need to ask you something." Her eyes fluttered open, a little unfocused. "Dylan," she murmured. "What's wrong?" I reached for her hand. "Do you remember signing any papers recently?" I asked softly. "Papers about this house." She frowned, her brows knitting together. "Papers," she echoed. I don't quite remember." I waited, my heart in my throat. "A few days ago, Russell came by," she finally said. "He had someone with him. They gave me some papers to sign, said it was important. I didn't really understand it. They didn't explain much." Her voice trailed off. I stood up, my hand curling into a fist. My stomach churned with a fury I could barely hold in. He used her. He used her confusion, her trust, and made her sign this. He sold her house. I returned to the door where the couple was still standing, now side by side, stiff and quiet. Bob's eyes met mine, hard and unreadable. Susan offered a weak smile, as if trying to smooth things over, but it only made my jaw tighten. I held the deed up between us, my grip like iron. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "There's been a huge mistake. My grandmother isn't capable of signing this contract." I stood frozen for a second, then stepped between them and the door, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "She's not capable of understanding something like this. You shouldn't even have brought a contract to her. I'll handle this. Please leave." Bob frowned, clearly not expecting resistance. He glanced at Susan, who gave him a subtle nod. He turned back to me with an expression that was meant to be reassuring but came off as patronizing. "Dylan, is it?" he said, calm but with an edge of authority. "We understand you're surprised, but the contract is signed. Everything is legal, notarized. 1 week from now, we'll be moving in. We hope your family can arrange to clear out and leave by then." His words hit me like a punch to the chest. 1 week, I echoed, my voice catching in my throat. "You don't understand. This is my grandmother's house. She would never want to sell it." I could feel the blood rushing to my face. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides. Susan stepped forward, her voice trying for sympathy but sounding rehearsed. "We're very sorry, Dylan," she said. "But we worked directly with Mr. Russell Hart. He said Mrs. Lillian agreed, and she signed in our presence. If there's an issue, you should talk to your father." My jaw tightened. Talk to my father. Of course. I wanted to scream at them, to tear up the papers they were holding and tell them to get out. But Bob's expression was cold, unyielding. I could see it clearly now. Arguing with them wouldn't get me anywhere. Thank you for letting me know, I managed, my voice dry and distant. I'll take care of this. I didn't wait for them to reply. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, the impact shuddering through me. Everything inside me twisted in anger and helplessness. I looked around the living room. Every piece of furniture like a fragment of memory, Grandma's favorite armchair, the spot where she'd sit and hum while knitting. The wedding photo on the wall of her and Grandpa, framed in gold. The tiny garden outside where she grew lavender just because I once said I liked the smell. All of it. Sold off like it meant nothing. I swallowed hard and grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed. The line rang once, twice, then again. Every ring felt like a blade twisting deeper into my chest. Finally, he picked up. Dylan, what's it now? His voice was clipped, impatient, like I was calling to complain about a missed appointment. Dad, I want the truth, I said, trying to keep my voice steady even as my heart pounded in my ears. You forced Grandma to sign a contract to sell her house, didn't you? She didn't know what she was signing. You took advantage of her confusion to sell this house. Why? For what? There was silence. Long enough that I thought maybe he hung up. Then he answered. Calm, like always. But there was something in his voice, strained, defensive. Dylan, you're blowing this out of proportion. She agreed. She signed. Everything's legal. You weren't here. You don't know legal? I snapped, unable to hold it back. You call it legal to coerce someone who's not mentally sound into signing papers? You knew she's been struggling with her memory. You knew she couldn't understand what she was signing, and now they're saying they'll move in a week. Where's Grandma supposed to go? A nursing home or out on the street? My voice shook as I tried to keep it steady, but the anger and disbelief bled through every word. Don't talk to me like that, Dad snapped, sharper than I'd ever heard him. It was the first time I'd heard him lose his composure. The calm, composed man who always spoke in carefully measured tones was suddenly gone. You think I did this for fun, he said. Do you know how much debt Kevin is in? His company is on the verge of bankruptcy. If we don't help him, the whole family will lose everything. I felt like I'd been hit in the chest. Grandma's house. It's just an old house, he continued, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. She doesn't need it anymore. We'll find somewhere else for her. I couldn't breathe. The words hit me like a slap. Kevin. This was all for Kevin. You sold Grandma's house, I said slowly, like if I said it too fast I might break apart. The place she and Grandpa built their life in. The place we spent every summer. To save Kevin's business. Dylan, Dad started. So you chose Kevin over Grandma. I cut in, my voice rising with each syllable. You're willing to sacrifice her to save him, aren't you? There was silence. A long, heavy silence. Then I heard a sigh on the other end, long and tired, but it didn't carry regret. Only resignation. Dylan, you don't understand, he finally said, his voice hardening again. This is for the good of the whole family. You need to grow up and accept it. I stared at the floor. For the good of the family, I whispered, my throat tight. I ended the call, not waiting to hear anything else. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. My chest felt like it was caving in. The good of the family. Those words cut deeper than I could have imagined. Weren't we part of that family? Grandma and me? I sank into the chair by the window. My mind spiraled. Was Mom okay with this? Had she agreed to it? Nodded along while Dad made plans to throw Grandma out like she was some worn-out couch? I pulled out my phone and called her. It rang. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. I sent a text, fingers trembling. Mom, I need to talk. It's about Grandma. Urgent. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. 30. Still no reply. Nothing. No call. No text. The silence was its own kind of answer. I stared at the screen, then scrolled down to Abigail's contact and hit call. No answer. I sent her a message too. Abigail, do you know about Grandma's house being sold? What do you think about this? The read receipt never appeared. Of course it didn't. Abigail hated anything messy. She'd post filtered smiles and picture-perfect dinners, but disappear at the first sign of conflict. She always sided with Mom and Dad anyway. I let the phone fall into my lap and looked around Grandma's living room. The old wooden shelves. The faded rug. The photos that still hung on the wall like the family was whole. I felt it then, truly felt it. How deep the fracture had become. I had never felt more alone. My family, the people I once thought I belonged to, had betrayed not only Grandma, but me as well. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, my love for Grandma anchoring me to one side, and the bitter truth about my father, my sister, and even my mother pulling me toward the other. The safety net I'd always believed was there. Our family, our bond, had unraveled before my eyes. I didn't know what to do yet, but I knew one thing with certainty. I couldn't let this end like this. I wouldn't let them shove Grandma aside like she meant nothing. The next morning, I woke up with the weight of determination pressing on my chest. I skipped breakfast, hands shaking slightly as I scrolled through my contacts, searching for the one person who might know what to do. My civil law professor, Margaret Sinclair. She wasn't warm, exactly, but she was fierce when it came to justice. She once told our class, "The law is meant to protect the vulnerable, if you know how to use it." I dialed her number, praying she'd answer. "Professor Sinclair? It's Dylan Hart," I said when she picked up, trying to keep my voice level. "I really need your help." "What's going on, Dylan?" she asked, her voice brisk but attentive. "It's my grandmother," I began. "She was pressured into signing away her house, our family home, and she's not mentally competent. She's been declining for a while now. I'm scared they took advantage of her. I don't know how to stop it." She paused. I could hear her tapping something, maybe her pen, against a desk. "Dylan, if she lacked mental capacity at the time she signed, then the contract may be voidable. But you'll need evidence. Medical records. Witnesses. Something concrete that shows she didn't understand what she was agreeing to." "I can try to get those," I said, hope flickering beneath the dread. "Good. Start there." "And Dylan?" "Yes. Move fast. Once the sale goes through, it gets harder." "Thank you," I whispered, overwhelmed with both gratitude and the sudden weight of urgency. I hung up and drove straight to the local clinic in Fort Collins, heart pounding in my chest. Dr. Harris had been treating Grandma for over a year. I sat in the waiting room with my foot tapping uncontrollably until he called me into his office. I explained everything, as quickly and clearly as I could. Dr. Harris listened quietly. When I finished, he nodded. "Dylan, I can provide you with her records. About 6 months ago, we started documenting cognitive decline. She's had increasing trouble with short-term memory, orientation, even daily routines." I felt my chest loosen for the first time in days. "So that could help. It's clinical evidence. It's a start." "Thank you. Really." Leaving the clinic, I had a folder of hope tucked under my arm. But it wasn't enough. I needed someone who could speak to her day-to-day condition, someone who saw Grandma as she was, not as she used to be. I thought of Mrs. Helen, her next-door neighbor for the past 20 years. I remembered all the times she came by with fresh strawberries or stayed to chat about the garden or the weather. She would know. That evening, I walked over and knocked on her door. She opened it, her eyes soft, but sad when she saw me. "Oh, Dylan, I've been thinking about your grandmother ever since I heard." I didn't even have to explain. She invited me in and made tea like she always did. "I'm worried," I told her. "They made her sign something she didn't understand." "Did you see anything recently?" She looked at me over her glasses. "I did. 2 weeks ago, your father came by with 2 men. Dressed sharp, suits, briefcases. Your grandmother looked confused. I remember she kept asking what they were there for. I was in my garden, heard the whole thing. Would you be willing to say that in writing?" I asked, voice quiet. She didn't hesitate. "Yes. Anything for Lillian. She didn't deserve this." When I left her house, I felt both relief and a burning anger twisting deep in my gut. There was no denying it now. My father knew exactly what he was doing. He knew she was vulnerable and signed anyway. That night, I sat in Grandma's living room, still filled with her scent, her trinkets, the quilt she always folded over the couch, my laptop open, the folder from Dr. Harris on the table, and a blank document before me. I started drafting a plan. I would gather all the evidence, every medical record, Mrs. Helen's testimony, even the draft emails from the hospital portal that showed my grandmother's medical history wasn't some vague excuse. If necessary, I'd go to the couple who were buying the house. Maybe they didn't know the whole story. Maybe they'd listen. But 1 week wasn't enough time to prepare. I knew that, and I couldn't risk leaving Grandma in that house any longer. Not when Kevin or Abigail might show up with keys, or worse, when she might answer the door to strangers thinking it was just another visitor from church. So I made the decision. I'd bring her to Boulder. To my tiny apartment, barely enough room for one, let alone two. But she'd be with me, and that was the only thing that mattered. I knew what I was walking into, confronting my own parents. The same people who had spent years pretending I wasn't there unless they needed a favor or a good report card. But this time, I wouldn't be silent. I wouldn't let them ignore me. I would stand up, for Grandma, and for myself. The next morning, I stood at her bedroom door, watching her fold a scarf with trembling hands. "Grandma," I said softly, careful not to startle her, "I want to take you to my place for a few days." She looked up, the morning light catching her pale eyes. "To Boulder?" I nodded. "Boulder's beautiful. You'll like it." She hesitated, the scarf still in her lap. "You want me to go with you, Dylan?" Her voice was so gentle, like wind slipping through an open window. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," I said, kneeling beside her. I reached for her hand, holding it tightly between mine. I want you close to me. Just for a few days. Until I can sort everything out. She studied my face for a moment, then nodded. All right, then. I packed her a small bag, just the basics. A couple of cardigans, her medications, her well-worn notebook she liked to write in when her mind was clearer, and the wedding photo of her and Grandpa, the one in the silver frame with the small dent in the corner. As I tucked the frame gently into her bag, her hand reached out and gripped mine. Don't lose it, Dylan, she whispered. It's a memory of me and your grandfather. I won't, I said, though my throat tightened around the words. I promise. The drive to Boulder was long and quiet. Grandma sat beside me, looking out the window. Every now and then, she murmured about something she saw, the brown pastures, the clouds over the mountains, the hawks circling above a distant ridge. Those fields look thirsty, she mumbled once. Too dry. I glanced at her and nodded, unsure if she was speaking to me or just remembering something far away. When we arrived, I helped her up the narrow stairwell and into my cramped studio apartment. She looked around, smiling as if I'd just brought her to a five-star suite. This place is cozy, Dylan. Are you doing okay here? I nodded, giving her the bed while I set a blanket and pillow on the floor beside it. The truth was, I wasn't okay. This place wasn't meant for someone like her. No soft garden bench, no faded armchair, no room for the little comforts she needed. But here, she was safe. And that was enough. That night, while she drifted off to sleep, I sat by the window with her file spread out across my knees. Medical reports, doctor's notes, Mrs. Helen's written statement. I was getting closer. Closer to building a case strong enough to halt the transfer, to stop the house from slipping away. But I still needed to know more. Why had my parents done this? Where did the money from the house sale go? That question had been eating at me for days. I had the documents, the rushed contract, the medical records showing Grandma's cognitive decline, Mrs. Helen's testimony. But the missing piece was the money. I needed to hear it from Kevin himself. I sat at the edge of the mattress, Grandma asleep behind me, the soft hum of Boulder traffic filtering through the cracked window. My thumb hovered over his name on my phone screen. I took a breath and tapped call. It rang 3 times before he picked up. Dylan, he said, drawing out my name like he was pretending to be happy to hear from me. Long time no talk. I didn't bother with small talk. You know about Dad selling Grandma's house, don't you? My voice was flat, cold. You know he coerced her into signing a contract when she wasn't lucid. There was a pause. I didn't wait for him to dodge. Did the money from the house go into your company's account? Explain, Kevin. Another pause, longer this time. Then he sighed. When he spoke again, the fake cheer was gone. Dylan, you don't understand. My company's in serious trouble. I owe a huge amount. If I don't pay it off, everything I've built is gone. Mom and Dad, they just wanted to help me. Help you, I said, my voice rising before I could stop it. By selling Grandma's house? By taking advantage of her? Do you even know where she is right now? I didn't wait for him to answer. She's in my apartment. My student apartment. Because Mom and Dad were about to throw her out of her own home. Her home, Kevin. Have you ever thought about her? Or is it always about your investments and your image? His tone snapped hard in response. Don't talk to me like that, he barked. You think I wanted this? You think I like relying on Mom and Dad? You have no idea what I'm dealing with, Dylan. You're just a kid studying law, sitting there judging everyone like you're better than us. I felt the blood rush to my ears. My hand tightened around the phone. I'm not better, I said quietly. I just haven't forgotten who raised us. I hung up. The silence that followed felt loud, the kind that buzzes in your teeth. I stared at the phone screen, the reflection of my own face staring back, jaw clenched, eyes tired, heart pounding. I turned and looked at Grandma, curled up on the narrow bed in the corner. Her breathing was steady, soft, almost childlike. A half-folded quilt tucked under her chin. They had thrown her away. My parents, Kevin, they had turned her into a financial asset, not a person. They chose to save Kevin's collapsing fantasy of success instead of protecting the woman who built this family. I felt sick. I opened my laptop, hands shaking slightly, and started typing. Not a message to my parents. Not a plea for understanding. A legal document. A notice of intent to sue. I wrote out everything. Elder abuse. Fraudulent conveyance. Lack of mental capacity. Violation of fiduciary duty. I attached every bit of evidence I had. Bank records, screenshots, the testimony from Mrs. Helen, doctor's notes. Then I sent the draft to Professor Sinclair. Her reply came within the hour. Dylan, with the evidence you have, this case has merit. But prepare yourself. This isn't just a legal battle. It's a family war. And I knew she was right. When I sent the notice of intent to sue to my parents via email, with copies to Kevin and Abigail, the response was immediate. My phone rang not even 5 minutes later. It was Dad. Dylan, he barked the moment I picked up. What the hell are you doing? Suing your parents? You're an ungrateful brat tearing this family apart. Who do you think you are? I'm someone who still believes in right and wrong, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You manipulated Grandma into signing over her home when she couldn't even remember what day it was. You don't know what you're talking about, he snapped. This is family business. You don't drag it into court. No, I replied, teeth clenched. You dragged it into court when you used her as a solution to Kevin's mess. He hung up without another word. Less than a minute passed before Mom's name flashed on my screen. Dylan, she began, her voice trembling, not with remorse, but with disbelief. How could you do this to us? Do you want the whole world to know our family's a mess? Do you want to destroy Kevin? I want the truth, I said quietly. And I want Grandma to be treated like a human being, not some pawn. She sighed sharply, the kind of exasperation I'd grown used to. You don't understand what this will do. What it already did is the problem, I said, and ended the call. Their voices, their guilt trips, they didn't move me anymore. Not like they used to. I wasn't the kid sitting quietly at dinner while Kevin got praised for everything and I was told not to stir things up. They had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. That night, I sat by the window of the apartment, watching moonlight spill onto the floor like water. Grandma was already asleep in the bedroom. I could hear her soft, uneven breathing. I thought about something she once told me when I was maybe 12 years old, curled next to her on the porch swing. The law is for protecting those who can't protect themselves. I would do that. For her. For me. To prove I wasn't invisible. I would take this to court, and I would let the truth speak. The weeks that followed blurred together. Sleep became optional. I was a first-year law student, not some seasoned attorney, but I threw myself into the case. I barely went out. My meals were coffee and vending machine granola bars. Every phone call, every document, everything was fuel. I gathered Grandma's medical records. I sat down with Mrs. Helen, her longtime neighbor, and got her full statement about the day Dad and Kevin arrived with a notary and pressured Grandma into signing papers she clearly didn't understand. And I contacted Bob and Susan Miller, the couple who'd agreed to buy Grandma's house. We didn't know Mrs. Lillian wasn't lucid, Susan said when we spoke on the phone. Her voice was hesitant at first, then softened. If we had known, we wouldn't have signed the contract. Would you be willing to testify? I asked. A long pause. Then, yes. If it helps set things right, we will. Her words gave me a glimmer of hope in an otherwise gray storm. But I wasn't naive. I knew this wouldn't be easy. My parents had money. They had presence. And Kevin, he could sell a lie with that same confident smile he'd worn his entire life. They weren't just fighting to keep the house. They were fighting to preserve the image of our perfect family. And that's when Professor Sinclair stepped in, not as my lawyer, but as my compass. She couldn't represent me in court, but she helped me shape every part of the case. We met late in her office. She sat across from me in her usual calm, no-nonsense way, flipping through my outlines and notes. Dylan, focus on two things, she said. First, prove that Mrs. Lillian lacked the mental capacity to sign the contract. Second, demonstrate that your parents deliberately exploited that. You have the evidence, but you need to present it clearly and persuasively. I nodded, committing every word to memory. Her guidance anchored me, but nothing could stop the pounding in my chest every time I thought of the courtroom. Because the truth was, I wasn't just preparing to stand in front of a judge. I was preparing to face my parents. And they weren't just defendants in a lawsuit. They were my family, or at least the people I once called family. I sat there thinking about everything they'd done. Kevin, always the golden child, was protected from consequences his entire life. And Abigail? She never got involved in anything that might make her uncomfortable. She just stood by and watched. I couldn't stop wondering. Would they even show up? Would Kevin sit there in a courtroom and try to justify gutting our grandmother's life savings for his business? Would Abigail pretend she didn't know? The trial date arrived quicker than I expected. I barely slept the night before. The Fort Collins courthouse wasn't big, just a modest building with dark wood-paneled walls and rows of benches that creaked when people shifted. I wore my old Navy suit. It didn't fit right anymore, a little too tight in the shoulders, but it made me look like I belonged. That mattered. Grandma sat beside me in the gallery. She was wearing the pale blue sweater I'd given her last winter, the one with the slightly crooked buttons. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly, and her hands trembled just slightly as she held her purse in her lap. She looked so small, so tired. I hated that she had to be here, but I couldn't protect her any other way. If I didn't do this, no one else would. I glanced across the aisle. My parents were already seated, looking polished and composed. Dad in his gray suit and Mom with her usual pearl earrings, like it was some kind of church gathering. Their attorney sat with them, his suit darker and more expensive than mine, a man with a clipboard and too much confidence. Kevin wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. He had more important things to deal with, I was sure. Abigail wasn't there either, not surprising. She never showed up when things got real. The bailiff called for silence, and everyone stood as the judge walked in. She was a middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair and sharp, assessing eyes that seemed to take in everything in an instant. She took her seat behind the bench and struck the gavel. "Court is now in session," she said. My heart was hammering in my chest. My palms were damp. But I stood, notes in hand, and stepped up to the front. "Your Honor," I began, my voice unsteady. I swallowed and tried again. "Your Honor, I stand here today to request that the court declare the contract transferring my grandmother's home, Mrs. Lillian Hart, null and void." I could feel my voice growing stronger as I went on. My grandmother has been diagnosed with cognitive decline. She lacked the mental capacity to understand the nature and consequences of signing that contract. My parents, Mr. Russell and Mrs. Claudia Hart, exploited her condition. They coerced her into signing, knowing full well she was confused, vulnerable, and unable to grasp what she was giving away. I walked to the evidence table and handed over the documents. These are the medical records from Dr. Harris, her physician, confirming her diagnosis and her deteriorating state around the time the contract was signed. I kept my eyes steady, even as my voice trembled again slightly. I also present testimony from her neighbor, Mrs. Helen Mallory, who regularly checked in on her and observed her mental state. And Susan Kirkland, the buyer, is present. She agreed to testify. Susan approached the stand nervously. Her voice was soft, but steady. She didn't seem, "Well," Susan said. Mrs. Lillian kept asking who we were. She seemed confused. Mr. Hart, Russell, had to remind her several times what to do. He told her where to sign. She looked scared. I don't think she understood what was happening. I thanked Susan and sat down, breathing hard, watching my parents' lawyer rise. He was tall, well-groomed, with a voice that sounded like he'd practiced it in a courtroom mirror. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "my clients acted in Mrs. Lillian Hart's best interests. The contract was signed willingly. It was notarized, and therefore legally binding. There is no evidence of coercion." He paused, then looked directly at me, the corners of his mouth curling just slightly. "This case, Your Honor, is not about legality. It's about emotion. The plaintiff, Mr. Dylan Hart, is a law student, bright, but inexperienced. He's allowing personal feelings to cloud his judgment. He is blowing this out of proportion due to personal emotions." His words stung like a blade. I felt my face flush with heat, but I forced myself to stay calm. Kevin was trying to paint me as some naive law student playing hero. I could have lashed out, shouted him down in front of everyone, but that wasn't what Grandma needed. She needed me steady, focused. I stood when it was my turn again. My legs felt heavy, but my voice was stronger than before. "Your Honor," I began, meeting the judge's eyes. "This isn't about personal emotions. It's about justice." I glanced at my parents and at Kevin. None of them looked at me. My parents knew my grandmother wasn't lucid. Yet they pressured her to sign a contract that transferred ownership of her home, the only home she's ever known. Not to provide for her, not to protect her, but to fund my brother's failing company. They didn't consult her. They didn't explain what was happening. And they didn't care where she'd go after losing her home. I stepped aside, letting the weight of my words hang in the courtroom. "I have proof," I added. The funds from that sale were wired directly into Kevin's business account. Not to Grandma, not to a trust, to him. I sat down, my hands shaking slightly in my lap. Then it was Grandma's turn to testify. My heart was pounding. I didn't want her up there. She was fragile, her health unstable. But Professor Sinclair had said her voice mattered, maybe more than mine. I stood to help her, guiding her gently by the elbow. Her hand gripped mine tightly as we walked to the witness stand. Under the harsh courtroom lights, she looked so small, like the world had worn her down to something breakable. But there was a quiet strength in her back, straight despite the years. The judge's tone softened as she addressed her. "Mrs. Lillian, do you remember signing papers to sell your house?" Grandma looked at the judge. Her eyes were cloudy but searching. I'm not sure," she said. Her voice trembled. "My son Russell. He told me to sign something. I thought it was bank papers." She paused. Everyone in the room leaned forward, waiting. I don't remember clearly," she admitted. Her voice cracked. "But that's my house. My husband and I, we lived there our whole lives. I never wanted to leave." The silence that followed was brutal. I looked over at Mom. She had her head bowed low, her fingers clutched around her purse. Dad still had that cold look plastered across his face, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch, like the mask was cracking. Their lawyer tried to recover, droning on about presumed lucidity, contractual thresholds, trying to argue that Grandma was aware enough to consent. But he was grasping. Susan's testimony, The medical records, Mrs. Helen's statement. Each piece of evidence was like another nail in the coffin of their case. The day dragged on, hour after hour. My head throbbed. My mouth was dry. When the judge finally called a recess to deliberate, I helped Grandma to a bench in the hallway. She sat down slowly, adjusting her scarf. "You did great, Dylan," she said, her voice barely audible. I smiled at her, though a storm was still churning inside me. Anger, betrayal, but also something else. Hope. That afternoon, when the judge returned, everyone in the courtroom seemed to be holding their breath. I could feel Grandma's hand in mine, trembling. Based on the evidence presented, the judge said, her voice strong and certain, "The court declares the contract transferring Mrs. Lillian Hart's house null and void, as she lacked the mental capacity at the time of signing." My chest tightened. Furthermore, the judge continued, "The court grants temporary guardianship to Dylan Hart to ensure Mrs. Lillian's best interests are protected going forward." Silence. Then I heard Mrs. Helen let out a long, shaky sigh from the benches behind us. I turned to Grandma, and she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I held her hand and felt her squeeze mine tightly. I looked at my parents. Dad stood up first, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the back wall like I wasn't even there. He walked out of the courtroom in silence, not sparing me a glance. Mom followed behind him, her head lowered, her face blank. She didn't look at me either. They both disappeared through the double doors without a word. But I knew they'd lost. Not just in the legal sense, though the judge's ruling had been firm and clear, but in the deeper, harder to swallow way. They'd lost to the truth. The truth they'd tried to bury beneath paperwork and notarized lies. The truth they'd told themselves didn't matter. As I stepped outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun was dipping behind the Rockies. The long shadows stretched across the pavement like fingers pulling the day into night. I walked slowly, helping Grandma down the courthouse steps. Her hand clutched mine, small and trembling, but full of warmth. The air was crisp, and the sky above was the kind of soft orange that makes you think of endings. I opened the car door and helped her inside, gently buckling her seatbelt. Then I slid into the driver's seat, shut the door, and just sat for a moment, breathing. The silence between us was calm, not empty. As I turned the ignition, Grandma looked at me, her lips curved in a small, proud smile. "You're my pride, Dylan," she said. Those 4 words did something to me, more than any court ruling could. I nodded, blinking quickly, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. "I kept my promise," I said quietly. "To you. To Grandpa." She rested her hand lightly on my arm. "I know, sweetheart. He'd be so proud too." The road from Fort Collins back to Grandma's house seemed longer than usual. It wasn't traffic or distance. It was the heaviness sitting on my chest. The loss of what used to be my family. The win had come at a price. Grandma sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, eyes tracing the landscape outside. The Rockies shimmered in the fading light, their snow-covered peaks glowing faintly against the dusk. It struck me how they stood unchanged, solid and unmoved, while everything inside me felt like shifting gravel. I'd won. The house was back in her name. But all I could think about was Kevin's expression in court, Abigail's avoidance, my father's anger, and my mother's tears. I wondered, do I still belong to them? By the time we pulled up to the house on the edge of town, night had almost fully settled. The lavender bushes swayed gently in the garden, purple sprigs catching the last bit of light. I got out and opened the gate, the familiar creak sounding louder than usual. The house stood there, small, weathered, but steady, the same way it had always been. I helped Grandma out of the car, placing her small overnight bag at her feet. She looked around slowly, taking in the chipped paint on the porch railing, the faded roof tiles, the slightly crooked mailbox. Then her eyes softened. "This is our home, isn't it, Dylan?" I looked at her, my throat tightening. "Yes, Grandma," I said. "This is your home, and it will always be your home." Inside, everything smelled like old books and time. I guided her to the armchair in the living room, the one by the window where the light poured in every morning. She sank into it with a soft sigh, her frame relaxing like she hadn't fully breathed in months. I went into the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove. As the water heated, I reached for the tea tin she always kept in the cupboard, her favorite blend. A gentle mix of mint and chamomile. As I placed the cup in her hands, she grasped mine, her fingers soft and cool, but the grip steady. She squeezed lightly, her eyes meeting mine with a clarity that was rare these days. "You're a good boy, Dylan," she said, her voice gentle and full of memory. "Just like your grandfather when he was young." The ache that bloomed in my chest was sudden and sharp. I knelt beside her, still holding her hand, my other hand resting lightly on her knee. Her warm brown eyes, usually clouded, often drifting, held mine for a long, still moment. I felt something pass between us. Recognition. Gratitude. Love. Grandma, I'm going to stay here with you for a while, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I want to make sure you're okay. She smiled at me, but I could see the hesitation behind it, the flicker of worry in her expression. You don't need to do that, Dylan, she whispered, her thumb brushing against the back of my hand. I don't want to be a burden. You're never a burden, I said quickly, my voice catching. I swallowed and tried again, more firmly. You're the most important person to me. She nodded slowly, as if weighing my words, trying to understand them not just with her ears, but with the pieces of her mind still holding on. I stayed there beside her for a while, holding her hand, breathing in the scent of mint and chamomile wafting from the cup. In the days that followed, I settled into a quiet rhythm I never imagined I'd know. Each morning, I rose early, sometimes before the sun, and made tea for Grandma. Then we'd step out into the backyard garden, where the lavender bushes swayed gently in the breeze. I took to kneeling beside her as she sat in the old iron bench, a faded cushion tucked under her for comfort. She showed me how to care for them, how to snip away the dry stems without hurting the base, how to dig out weeds without tearing the roots. I'd watch her hands, slow but deliberate, her mind sometimes lost, but her fingers still remembering. Grandma, I said one morning as I fumbled with the shears, trying not to cut too much. How do you know what to take and what to leave? She chuckled softly, her eyes focused on the plant in front of her. It's like people, Dylan, she said, reaching out to guide my hands. You have to care for them, love them, for them to thrive. I nodded, feeling her words were about more than just plants. They were about us. She never said it directly, but I could hear it in her voice, the way she talked about roots, care, weathering seasons. It wasn't just about the garden anymore. It was about how people survive and grow, even when storms come. In the afternoons, I sat with her in the living room, the air warm with the scent of her lavender hand cream, and listened to her recount old stories about Grandpa, how they met, their wedding, the little lakeside cabin they rented every summer when I was a kid. I remembered the picnics she described, the ones with watermelon slices and plaid blankets, and realized some of those memories weren't just hers. They were mine too. Sometimes she called me by Grandpa's name. Justin, she'd say softly, touching my cheek. Do you remember the old red truck? I didn't correct her. I just smiled, held her hand, and said, of course I do. Letting her live in the memories she still held, it felt like the least I could do. Those moments, however brief, were the most precious to me, but it wasn't always peaceful. The rift with my family remained an unhealed wound, raw and bitter under the surface. After the trial, my parents didn't contact me. Not a call, not even an email. I heard from a mutual friend that Dad was furious. Ungrateful, he'd shouted in front of his golf buddies. How dare he drag our name through court? Mom didn't say anything. That was her way. Silence. As if ignoring me preserved the illusion that we were still a perfect family. Like I could be cropped out, retouched. Kevin sent me a single text. You've ruined everything, Dylan. Hope you're happy. I didn't respond. What was there to say? I had already said it all in court, under oath, when it mattered. As for Abigail, well, she kept posting her perfect little squares on Instagram. Weekend brunches, wine nights, spa selfies. I was no longer in any of them. Not even a tag, not even a ghost. But I didn't regret it. My family had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. One evening, as I was cleaning the kitchen, the sound of water running and pans clinking filling the silence, Grandma called to me from the living room. Dylan, come here, she said, her voice soft but clear. I dried my hands and walked over, and found her sitting with an old photo album open on her lap. She was holding the wedding photo of her and Grandpa, black and white, slightly curled at the edges, her veil caught in the breeze, his arm proudly around her. You know, she said, her eyes bright with rare clarity, your grandfather always said you'd do something great. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw her seeing me. Not Justin. Me. I see him in you, she whispered. The way you fight. The way you don't give up. My throat tightened. I bowed my head. I just wanted to do what's right, Grandma, I said quietly. I learned that from you. And Grandpa. She smiled and touched my hand. Justin, she said suddenly, her voice slipping back into a time long gone, you always make me proud. I didn't correct her. I just held her hand and let her stay in that moment where she and Grandpa were still together, where time was kind and nothing had been lost yet. In the months that followed, I began reflecting on the lessons this journey had taught me. I learned that family isn't just those bound by blood, but those who truly see you, who truly love you. I learned that justice isn't just about winning a lawsuit, but about standing up for what's right, even at a painful cost. And I learned that sometimes the only person who still remembers you, truly remembers you, is the one you should never forget. Dear listeners, Please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.